Something interesting that we're essentially told through Secret of the Mimic is that Edwin created new Springlock suits that were safer to wear.
I think Henry and William contracted Edwin to make a different design of the Springlock suits, maybe to make them safer, something like that.
But Edwin's reinforced Springlock suit designs were a lot safer than Henry's.
He helped make the newer versions as confirmed through an email log with Fiona.
Edwin Murray made safer Springlocks.
It's almost as if they're not the same kind of Springlocks. And that is exactly the case.
Edwin Murray made safer ones.
Edwin has made new Springlock suits that hopefully won't cause hand loss.
So because there's a huge difference of these suits, I think they're just that, different suits. Edwin Murray made some, but the ones that were used by Fazbear were made by William and Henry.
They were safe.
It's amazing how so many experts can all independently come to the same non-sequitur. There's a new idea floating around that Edwin invented newer, safe Springlock suits to replace the ones that snap shut with water. It's even mentioned on the fandom wiki on the Springlock suit page, and that detail specifically really bothered me, so I wanted to share my thoughts on why I think it's wrong. First, I want to try something different for this video. We all know the classic YouTube comment that's like, "You didn't talk about X," and it turns out the video did talk about X, so all the replies to the comment are like, "Did you even watch the video?" Well, to cut down on useless discussions and toxicity that stems from not watching the video before commenting, I put together a little scavenger hunt to prove that you watched the video all the way through, and you'll need to complete it if you want to join the discussion in the comments. You'll need to piece together a code word using letters and instructions randomly placed in the corners of the slides throughout the video. Including that code word at the beginning or end of your comment proves to me that you've watched the video all the way through, and your comment will be allowed to stay up. If you don't include the code or the code is wrong, I'll assume that you didn't watch the video and your comment will be deleted. This even includes low-effort comments like "first" or "hi." If you want to have a first comment that actually stays up, you'll just have to watch through the video quicker than everyone else. This challenge also includes any replies to other comments. This won't be too bad because you can just copy and paste your code once you figured it out. Exceptions will be made for good faith mistakes or comments where the only way you could have made that comment is clearly by watching the video. I've included an example code word here on this slide, William A, but you need to replace the first L with the last Latin letter of your YouTube handle. For example, my handle is StaticNebula26, so I would swap the L for an A, not a 6. If your handle doesn't contain any Latin letters, just use a space instead. If you decide you're not happy with your deletion and try to protest, I will not hesitate to ban you from my comment section. This is not a public forum, it's a private space where you earn access by being an observant viewer that can follow instructions when asked. If this video goes viral, I'll still try my best to enforce this, but I may not have the time, so I'm sorry if you end up seeing all those useless, toxic comments anyways. Just know that it's proof that this video is doing better than I ever expected. Now, with that out of the way, let's look at the evidence about Springlocks in Secret of the Mimic. In the game, Arnold, the player character, wears a Springlock suit. This Springlock has to be energized instead of hand-cranked, and we never see it in animatronic mode. We then proceed to wear it through multiple risky situations, and even a large drop, but no Springlock failure occurs. In the voice messages and emails in Secret of the Mimic, we get 2 mentions of the Springlocks. First, from Fiona to Edwin, a Mrs. Helpful voice message.
Ed, I hate talking to you through this stupid bear, but it's hard to reach you otherwise. I'm worried about the new suit design. One of my costumers, Vic, nearly lost his hand today. All he did was spill a can of pop and the thing snapped shut like a bear trap. You're busy, but you can't rush these things. Please look into it.
Second, from Edwin to Fiona through the mail system. Fiona, the new Springlocks are working well, even with the water damage. They should be ready for the diner soon. I'll make sure to warn Hen about some of the more odd behaviors they might have. Now it seems some people have taken the gameplay evidence along with the second message to imply that there are new, safer Springlocks. Ones that work well even with water damage, and that need to be energized rather than hand-cranked. This checks out fine enough on the surface. I've then seen that hypothesis extended to say that these new Springlocks are safer because they don't have an animatronic mode at all, and I'd take greater issue with that. I think this conclusion is wrong, though, because it lacks context, both in-game and in a meta sense. And the implication of this idea being true leaves way more questions than answers. Let's get the obvious problem out of the way. If there are safer Springlocks in 1979, why weren't they used for the rest of the series? The wiki states that they weren't used, quote, due to requiring a large assembly/charging crane, and the prototypes displaying odd behaviors, end quote. This doesn't really make any sense because the ones in R&D don't require the charging crane at all, and we don't see any of these new to us odd behaviors in-game that would make them somehow more unusable than the hand crank death traps that we all know and love. I mean, these are pretty glaring plot holes when the main villain of your franchise's existence depends on these suits being unsafe. I don't think William is the type to be so dumb and prideful that he says, "Real men wear their own self-made deadly fursuit, not some safe, liberal-made copy." I mean, maybe he is that prideful, but he's not so dumb as to not use the, as far as we know, perfectly functioning quintet of Springlocks in this game over the incomplete classic animatronics that would require way more effort to finish. He only made Edwin make those in the first place because Edwin was just about to finish the Fazbear project, which William couldn't allow. This is really my main point of contention with the idea of safe Springlocks, and it's the initial point that I base the rest of this series of videos off of. Scott might be rewriting the beginning of the timeline, but I really highly doubt that he'd do something so monumentally stupid and retroactively create a massive plot hole just because he wanted a reason for Arnold to somehow survive his small stint in a Springlock suit. And it turns out Scott didn't. So let's use the evidence given to us and finally correctly decipher what Mr. Cawthon was trying to tell us about Springlocks and what it means for Secret of the Mimic in general. First, the gameplay. This one's pretty simple when you look at the game as a game. Arnold, our player character, can't die in a Springlock suit failure in the middle of the game. He has plot armor. Therefore, the athleticism and durability shown by his Springlock suit shouldn't be used as evidence for the Springlock suit being a newer, safer model. If you want an in-universe explanation, I guess you could claim that Arnold works for Fazbear, so maybe he has prior experience with how to move gracefully in Springlocks. Editor's note. Actually, we can prove he does. There's a document in Arnold's van that certifies him to operate all Fazbear technology, which would include Springlock suits. And surviving the fall, dumb luck. Or maybe because these Springlocks are much newer since it's earlier in the timeline, they just are safer, and they slowly get more dangerous over the decade or so that they were used. Or maybe Springlocks aren't actually as fragile when it comes to movement as we think. Maybe they've always just been vulnerable to liquid, and moving around is dangerous because it makes people sweat. Maybe Springlocks are more like cars. You should regularly check that you still have 2 working headlights, but the chances of a headlight going out are actually pretty slim. There's a lot of ways to twist the evidence. Does it even matter? Do we really need a reason for everything in FNAF? We're talking about the game series with a seemingly very local restaurant chain that had at least 7 deaths associated with it. How did they even manage to stay in business? Springlocks don't even make financial sense. It's much simpler to have a humanoid robot wear the same mascot suit the employees wear, rather than just making the suit itself into a robot. The technology was clearly there with the Mimic Endo. It just doesn't make any sense. Why, Scott? Why? Like, yeah, I guess it's nice if we get these kind of answers, but they don't really affect the story whatsoever. Like, oh, Arnold knows how to use Springlocks, therefore we know that other employees besides Henry and William wore the Springlock suits, I guess. It's such a minor fact that it just doesn't really matter. We don't need airtight logic in these stories. We're getting the story from an artist, not an engineer, not an accountant, and definitely not a lawyer. Scott doesn't fact-check everything he writes. Anyways. As for why they need to be energized, the endo power needs to come from somewhere. Also, it seems like the Springlocks are almost like exosuits. After all, it'd be hard to manually move a huge metal suit like that. It's also possible that the normal hand crank operation is done automatically by that huge yellow arm at the same time as energizing. And finally, why don't we see one in animatronic mode? Again, I think it's just plot convenience and relevancy. Every other Springlock in the building just happened to be in suit mode for the exact same reason why we don't need to energize any of them beforehand either. Because Arnold needed to use them quickly, and we'd already seen one get energized. And I guess Steelwool just didn't see it necessary to show them in endo mode. So now, the messages. When I see this safer Springlocks theory, they often mention the second message that I provided. The message literally says, new Springlocks. But with the context of the first message, the intended meaning becomes clear.
I'm worried about the new suit design. One of my costumers, Vic, nearly lost his hand today. All he did was spill a can of pop and the thing snapped shut like a bear trap. You're busy, but you can't rush these things. Please look into it.
Fiona, the new Springlocks are working well, even with the water damage. They should be ready for the diner soon. I'll make sure to warn Hen about some of the more odd behaviors they might have. I would like to call attention to the fact that Edwin's mail states the water damage, not just some water damage. In English, the is the definite article. It marks a specific thing in a sentence rather than an unspecified thing like a, an, or some. Think about whether you need some keys or the keys. Some just implies that they can be any keys, you just need multiple for some reason. Versus the implies you need a specific set of keys, like the ones to your car, for example. Additionally, if you're telling another person about the keys, you're assuming the other person knows which specific set of keys you're talking about based on context. If you're standing in front of your car, the keys can be assumed to be the keys to your car. So, Fiona states a specific instance of water damage, aka the pop spilling on the Springlocks, and Edwin responds to her message by mentioning the water damage. Of course, that's referring to the specific incident Fiona knows about, not some other unspecified water damage testing down in R&D that only Edwin would know about. Fiona talks about the new suit design. Edwin responds by calling them the new Springlocks. The water damage was from the pop spill. Fiona asked Edwin to look into the damage caused and about making them safer, and he said, "They're working fine enough despite the water damage from the pop. I just have to tell Henry about the quirks, such as don't spill liquid on them." These aren't new Springlocks that are replacing the old ones. Fiona calls it the new suit design because at this point in the timeline, Springlocks are new in general. Imagine this metaphor. You live in a brick house built by Edwin. Something inside the house catches on fire. It burns everything inside the house, including you. Edwin arrives at the scene a day later and concludes the brick house is still standing, even after the fire damage. I'll just make sure to tell the future owner not to start fires in the house. He never actually fixed the underlying flaw of everything inside the house burning. He just called it good enough because the outside of the house didn't burn. You know, if I had a nickel for every time the FNAF fandom misread a line of dialogue about Springlocks and accidentally invented a plot hole that doesn't actually exist, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? What I take from this, despite how much I dislike all the Edwin made everything retcons, it does seem like he made the Springlocks. They fit with his signature brilliant ideas with shoddy execution motif that we see with all of his products from the commercials leading up to the release of the game. We get several messages from angry customers about these products failing to do their job properly in the mail logs found in the return room. This is a little personal bias, but for this case specifically, I like how this is evidence that William is actually a fraud that steals credit for others' inventions, and this also exonerates Henry from having any hand in making these awful designs, because as we know, Henry did nothing wrong. Additionally, the reason for Springlocks existing at all starts to make more sense. Fazbear starts with mascot costumes from MCM, like the Glitch Trap suit. Then Edwin invents Springlock suits, a mascot costume that can perform without a person inside. It's an evolution of the namesake of his family business. Then finally, much to Edwin's chagrin, William forces Edwin to pivot to animatronics completely, setting Edwin back further and further so Afton can eventually take over. A little idle speculation here. William might have used the same tactic on Henry to worm his way into Fazbear in the very beginning. Let's imagine for a second. Henry's family starts the Fredbear singing show, expands into Fall Fest where Afton takes notice, maybe in 1970, and he wants in. He manipulates Henry to expand into the restaurant business with the original diner, an infamously high-risk industry, until he's so in debt to Afton that he takes the same deal that Afton offers to Edwin later, and that deal forms Fazbear Entertainment Inc. That would be the first wound inflicted on Henry, what bled out to create the rest of the series, making a deal with a demon. And another detail to add to this headcanon. The line about William not taking Edwin's house seems a little odd, doesn't it? Maybe that's because when he first made this deal with Henry, he actually did take ownership of Henry's house, and in Midnight Motorist, After drives over to Henry's house, where Gray Man Henry is forced to sit on the couch and cohabitate with Michael, ever since William kicked him out of the FNAF 4 house after the Bite of 83. And now finally, welcome to the end of part 1. This series started as a video adaptation of my original Safe Springlock debunk on Reddit, but as I looked more and more into this topic, I learned about the evidence used to try to prove the existence of safe Springlocks, and in trying to grapple with debunking that new evidence as well, I spiraled into making this series so long that it went from one video with 3 sections into 3 parts, and then 4 parts. And now the current plan is 5 parts. This first part was just the very basics that I felt were needed to debunk the safe Springlocks misconception. But as you can see here, there's a lot of stuff I want to cover to really explain the full ramifications of Springlocks in Secret of the Mimic. We can even use this info to nail down a timeline of the earliest events in the series, and possibly explain some lingering questions from the Scott-era games. Part 2 is my current favorite, and I'll try to get it out before summer ends, but I'm terrible with deadlines, so no promises unfortunately. And on that note,